Jeannie wasn't aware of any of this as the car continued to pitch and roll. She and Winds held on, side by side in the front seat, like sailors riding out a squall. Already, they'd existed inside this augmented reality for close to 4 minutes. The earthquake would last nearly 5, long enough for some people to question if it would ever stop, or even start to give up hope that it would. Jeannie stood on the brake, trying to steady the earth. She'd been focusing on a 2-story apartment building a block away as it swung forward and back, wondering, almost idly, if the scaffolding on the second floor might drop. Now, the building seemed to be fixing itself in place again like an animal, startled from a deep sleep, resettling. The motion let up gradually. Everything became stationary again, even the other drivers around her at the intersection. Jeannie looked up and saw the KENI television antenna, still upright on the roof of the 4th Avenue Theater building in the distance, and assumed the station would have power back soon and that the 6 p.m. news broadcast would go on as usual. That meant she had less than 20 minutes to put together a story. She threw her car in gear. Jeannie was oblivious to the magnitude of destruction. None of the buildings in her line of sight or even the utility poles had toppled, and her mind, still reeling, could only absorb what was visible in front of her. The situation didn't look that bad. Psychologists would come to call this phenomenon normalcy bias, a tendency of the human imagination to reclose around such disruptions and assume to an implausible degree, even in the midst of catastrophes, that life is still basically normal. Jeannie sped to the public safety building 3 blocks away to round up some details for a quick news report. She whirred into the parking lot within 60 seconds of the quake subsiding. Already firemen were pulling their trucks out of the garage. Normal procedure for a power outage, Jeannie knew. They'd use the radios in their vehicles to communicate until the power was restored inside. "You wait here," Jeannie told Winds, stepping out of the car. "Can I go on to the book cache and get my book?" he asked. The bookstore was close, near J.C. Penney. It was closing soon. "Yes, I shouldn't be here too long," Jeannie said. She'd drive by in a few minutes and pick him up. A police captain with a walkie-talkie rushed out of the public safety building past Jeannie as she made her way through the front door. Inside, no one was speaking. Jeannie recognized the clerk sitting at the police counter and began to ask her, "Say, do you know?" But the woman was so ashen-faced that Jeannie's voice fell apart mid-sentence. Jeannie hadn't noticed until now. The police department's filing cabinets and desks were thrown over. Heaps of ceiling plaster littered the floor. This would be her news story, she realized. The shaking had been strong enough to topple furniture in the public safety building, the most damage of any quake she'd experienced in her 5 years in Alaska. She raced toward the front door to radio KENI's studio from her car. The building started shaking again. The aftershock was vigorous but brief, only a few seconds. As it wound down and Jeannie stepped outside, she found Winds rushing back to the building. Her son looked pale and fearful. She went to put her arm around him. "Come quick," he told her. "Penny's building is falling down." Standing in the doorway of the public safety building, they could see the 5-story department store 2 blocks away. One high corner of its facade was missing, and now, as Jeannie and Winds watched through the flurrying snow, the tremendous concrete panel of the exterior next to that opening started to swing away from the building and crash back, as though hinged at the top. Each time the concrete swept outward, it traveled farther. Then finally, the entire panel dropped into the street with a mounting roar. "Hop in the car, honey, we're going," Jeannie told Winds. "Where?" "We're going to Penny's." She wasn't scared. Mostly she was indignant. The Penny's building was only 1 year old. Jeannie had covered the store's opening the previous spring. This was the structure's first real earthquake, and it was failing that test spectacularly. Jeannie grumbled aloud, cursing the city for allowing such shoddy construction. She assumed the builder had cut corners, was either crooked or incompetent. This would be her news story now, the crumbling of pennies. It still hadn't occurred to her that the earthquake might have torn apart other buildings too.